Welcome everyone to another episode of our real estate analysis show that Brian and I are going to be putting together. If you haven't already caught one of our past episodes, please go back, check it out. We analyzed triplex on that episode, which was very educational. It was a little bit longer format than what we wanted, but we provided a ton of great basic information to get a lot of people started with simply just understanding terms and how real estate analysis works. So here we have a new format that we're going to be trying, and I think let's just jump right into it.
Yeah, just to add a couple of things, we know that we both have a tendency to talk a lot, so we're going to try to keep our various topics that we talk about to 5 minutes. So if you start to hear us talk a little fast, it's because the clock is running out and we got to get our point across.
We've got a timer now, so
Yes.
This is going to be very interesting.
Yes, and it's not because we're about to start a brawl or match. You know, that might get us better ratings, but
It is a boxing ring.
Yeah, this is just so that we can cut it short.
Well, we might get into a boxing match later.
That might get ratings up. Yeah, I'm down for that.
Okay, so let's start with topic number one. So topic number one is awful questions. So Inman came out with an article about awful questions to ask. Question number one is, are you pre-qualified?
Well, and just to be specific, awful questions and how to ask them with respect to real estate agents or real estate in general. So the question that Mark was bringing up was, are you pre-qualified? I guess the industry perceives that as a very awful question to have to ask their buyers. And again, we're going to address these different things, Mark.
So I'm not a fan of this question, and a lot of real estate agents ask this to buyers, especially at open houses. Are you pre-qualified, or even are you pre-approved? There's a lot of real estate agents and loan officers that mix and match pre-qualified with pre-approved with different meanings. And so if our own people in the industry get confused with the terms, why are we even asking buyers to do this? I'm a big fan of simply asking the buyer, have you talked to a loan officer and have you discussed financing options? Brian?
Well, I'm a little bit more old school with this, and I tend to have a little bit of a big background on different types of financing packages. So the way I approach this problem is very different. At the same time, since I have a lot of different agents under me that are coming in from various stages in their career, whether they're first-time agents or long-seasoned agents with their own style of doing things, I tend to ask, give them a more simplified version of asking this difficult question. So for me, I always use it as a segue to get as much information about the buyer. In fact, I'll even prepare them with, hey, I'm going to ask you some very detailed financial questions. Are you okay with that? The reason I'm going to do that is because it's going to help me to help you find out what different types of loan packages are out there that you might qualify for, such as a 3.5% down payment, which usually blows a lot of people's mind that they can actually come in with that low, or sometimes if they're qualified with as little as 0 down, such as with veterans loans. So this is an awful question that a lot of agents have because it's difficult to ask. They don't really know the question or the answers to these things. And as Mark mentioned, they a lot of times can just defer to, have you been qualified? So again, we're talking about how to ask them. And for me, I like to use it. I like to prepare them that I'm going to ask them a question, but also give them all the intrinsic benefits as to how answering it as truthfully as possible might help me to help them.
One thing I like to do is also, and I learned this years ago when I first got into real estate, is why are you even assuming that they're going to be financing the purchase? Why can't they be coming in as a cash buyer? And it's also one thing that's, if you've ever been on the buying side, if someone asks you, well, are you going to be buying this cash or are you financing it? It kind of makes you feel nice when someone thinks you can buy it cash. And I've seen some great results. I know it's a marketing tactic, but it does work for you real estate agents out there. So I would simply ask, are you planning to buy this property cash or are you looking to finance it? And then just keeping it very simple. If they come in and say, no, we really are looking for financing, then okay, well, have you talked to a loan officer? Where are you at in the qualification stages? And that just starts that conversation to get some more information out of them as to what's going on. And I think this is going to segue us into the second bad question is, are you working with a realtor? I hate this question so much because everyone's going to tell you yes. So why are you going to even ask, are you working with a realtor? They may have a cousin, a brother, sister, a relative, a friend, someone that they know. And I think at one point 1 out of 10 Californians were licensed real estate agents.
Right.
So most
Their
people
uncle works at the post office, has a license.
Exactly. So most people knew of some real estate agent. So I'm a fan of simply saying, if you make an offer on this property, do you have an agent that would write up the offer for you?
And again, just to kind of wrap things up, because we are beginning to run out of time, those are actually questions I'm on the polar opposite of. I like to always ask, are you committed to an agent? And then kind of explain to them the differences between whether they're working with an agent or not. That way, it just kind of doesn't waste my time and doesn't waste their time. And a lot of times these days, buyers are more savvy, so they'll let you know up front if they do have an agent. And if they don't tell you up front, then it might be a good idea, in my opinion, to ask. At least this is what I've always done. So, and I think with that, we need to go on to the next topic before we ramble on just too long, which we never do.
Let's go to the next one.
Okay.
So next topic is Keller Williams ghost agents. Oh, and there's our bell, so we beat the bell.
Wow, we beat the bell.
By like 5 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
So Keller Williams ghost agents. So if you haven't heard, Keller Williams has about 119,000 agents on their roster.
I was shocked by that. In fact, I felt a little bit better about my ghost agents that I have to worry about, which I'll get into from my perspective in a sec.
So let's explain a little bit what ghost agents are. Ghost agents, basically on your roster, are agents that don't sell real estate or maybe have passed away, or for whatever reason are not really involved with the company.
And for the benefit of the audience, when he's talking about roster, every agent has to work under a broker, and in fact, even many brokers will be broker associates under a managing broker. And so the Department of Real Estate keeps this roster of the responsible or managing broker and the agents that they're in charge of. And so this is the specific roster or role of agents, of which some agents might be ghost agents that we're referring to.
So Keller Williams came out, and I know for a lot of big companies, and I guess even smaller companies, it's always nice to brag about how many agents you have on your roster, even though many of them don't really sell real estate or not really involved in the industry, just basically you're a placeholder for their license. So Keller Williams announced that they are going to do a ghost agent purge and basically go through their entire roster and get rid of the agents that should not be on that roster. So is that good or is that bad?
Well, again, I'm going to come at it from the perspective of a broker that experiences very similar of the dilemmas as Keller Williams, although not 119,000 agents, some of which are dead. From my perspective, I've got anywhere from 10 to 15 agents, and then in addition to that, broker associates that are working with me in either at any given time. I've had as much as 80 agents at one time. And real estate's kind of a bit of a revolving door. All brokers are hopeful when they recruit that agent who's just passed their real estate license for the first time about all the different things that they might be able to do and be successful and productive in the business. And so from my perspective, a lot of times I'll see agents who've gone through training but never show up to the office and then wonder why they never have a sale, or they come to the conclusion they're just not cut out for this, but then they keep their license there just in case their relative, decides they want to buy a home. They might work at another job, but this is their side gig, and they tell you that they're gonna close a deal soon and they're gonna get back in the action. In fact, again, this is my personal experience. So that being said, many times when I have some level of communication with an agent, I'll kind of hold out on cutting them from my roster, but I also have to kind of mitigate that with the exposure that I have as a broker and the risk that it increases on my errors and omissions. Because the more agents you have under you, the higher your errors and omissions can be. This is an expensive business. I tend to purge my list a little bit sooner than later, but I also get a little bit of an attachment, so I kind of keep them on a little longer, but I don't necessarily do it for show, which I guess was a big issue with Keller Williams, just to make it look like there's a larger office there than there really might be.
Well, a lot of big brokers do that. I mean, it comes down to a bragging right and also a way to recruit agents. But I think what Keller Williams is doing is a very smart move, because by them announcing that, hey, we are acknowledging that we do have a lot of ghost agents and we're going to get rid of them, I think they're doing a good step in full transparency, and I think that's something that Keller Williams is really trying to push forward. Now, for me, as far as being a broker, I'm a big fan of hiring fast and also firing fast. And so I think the keeping agents on board as ghost agents simply for the numbers, I think that might be very old school mentality and old school marketing if you want to use those numbers. But in this day and age, we can pull up data, we can see what other agents are selling, and we can identify what actual offices and brokers are really selling as a company. And so we're able to see the production of various brokers and various independent companies. And I think that's just an old school marketing tactic that doesn't really work. And so coming from a broker point of view, you have resources that you have to, you're spending money and time on various resources just simply to keep some people on board. I really think if you just narrow it down, and you know what, in fact, there are some agents that don't sell a lot of real estate, but I think they should be purged by most brokers, right? Because and I know
they might not know exactly what they're doing and are going to get in trouble some way or another.
Yeah, because all it takes is for one bad transaction to happen, and all of a sudden you've got a big problem as a broker. That's going to cost you more than what it costs you to keep that one agent on board. There's our time. So let's go to the next section.
We're going to wrap that up, and hopefully that was helpful to some of you. So the next topic we have is, and this is a nice hot topic that we can go on and on for, marijuana legalization and the real estate industry, specifically commercial real estate. Mark, before I jump into this, what are your thoughts?
Marijuana and real estate is getting very interesting because from a property management perspective, there's the number one thing that we're seeing is owners coming to me and asking, well, if I can say no to smoking tobacco, can I say no to smoking marijuana? And of course, then the next question is, well, if I can I say no if they have a medicinal card? And so that's a really hot topic in property management. Another issue you also see is the market changes and the trends that we're seeing with bigger and bigger companies jumping into the marijuana industry that are now looking to buy real estate, that are looking for warehouses to lease out so that they can create their own growing distribution centers. And I think between those two are the biggest issues, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. And as a matter of fact, I've been doing this 28 years now, and sometime back in 2010, which was like 8 years ago. Again, I'm not an advocate of marijuana. I've never used marijuana, but for those of you who don't know, I actually went out and got a degree from Amsterdam University, which was a marijuana or cannabis university.
No one's going to believe you never tried it with that degree.
Right, I'm sure. Now, the main reason I went ahead and got this certification back in 2010 was because, one, the market was very depressed between 2008 and 2012. And during that time, Oakland, the city of Oakland, was having a massive push towards legalization. In fact, it was a huge hot topic. They were going to open up several 100,000 square feet of commercial grow opportunity. So I had a lot of various clients talking about this with me, asking me various questions on where they can go to get warehousing space, the proper electrical capacity, water capacity, things of this nature. So being who I am, I wanted to get the empirical data. So I went and got a university degree from Amsterdam in Oakland. And it really opened up my eyes to a lot of the legalities behind it, the federal government's position on it versus the state government's position versus the city or municipal police department's position on it and how they treat it. And a lot has changed since 2010 to present. There was more of a stigma behind it, even when you mentioned it, whereas now with different states that have legalized it, there's a lot more acceptance behind it. And again, someone who holds a biology degree, myself, when I took these classes at the Amsterdam University, I did actually see this actual medicinal relationship between the alleged pain relief effects of marijuana, as opposed to somebody just saying it helped them with aches. Because one of the things about marijuana is that it does have a high CBD1 and CBD2 content, which are specific molecules that bind directly to receptors that you have in your body and block pain relief. So again, I'm kind of going into all these different topics because these are all the various angles that are now becoming hot topics in 2019.
And each of those creates a separate demand in that own industry because you're talking about creating oils versus creating flowers to smoke.
Correct. Yeah. So just kind of segueing off of what Mark was mentioning, everybody knows about smoking or vaping or even the edibles, and then again the various industries that have grown up. One of the things that I saw was that the smaller mom and pop operations that were doing this perfectly legal in the specific green zones with all the licensing and permits. And when I say smaller mom and pop, I'm talking about the grower who may either be leasing or have purchased a warehouse that was 3,000 to 5,000 square feet. A lot of those clients that I had that I consulted with, they're actually they're experiencing a lot of bureaucracy behind the business. In fact, there was a lot of it just down to the way that it was taxed from the State Board of Equalization. Between 2010 and to present, there was the State Board of Equalization would actually return tax dollars that growers would send them. And so this put a lot of pressure on the smaller growers, whereas I see a big push towards this very large commercial grow operation, like from companies like Philip Morris.
Well, yeah, they just recently invested a ton of money into a company, and I don't remember the name of the company, but this company that they put money into, they specialize in grow and distribution operations.
Yes.
Specifically for marijuana. And so when you have a company like Philip Morris getting in, you know the other tobacco companies are thinking about it, because at some point, I think the tobacco industry is really going to disappear away, and the next level is going to be marijuana.
No, definitely. And again, the bell just went off. So just to kind of wrap things up, again, we can kind of go off on this for a long time. It's spawned all kinds of different new opportunities for these grow industries, right down to the FDA actually taking vegetables and regular produce to them for testing, because they have the highest level of equipment to just check, check the content of things. Yeah. But anyways, more on that later.
So our final topic here, before we get into a property analysis, is electrification of new buildings. So this is something that's very, it's being discussed at many different levels across the state of California and also other states too. But for many that don't know, a little bit of background here is that California has passed a law that will require new development buildings. Well, actually, is it all buildings or just single-family homes?
Right now, it's primarily single-family homes, but you're actually beginning to see a lot of push for that for new apartment complexes that are being built. There's a huge push to do away with natural gas and just gas in general. And so when you're talking about the electrification of houses, or in California, you're probably going to see more of a push towards solar, wind, and renewable energies that don't include gas.
Well, for single-family homes, after the year 2030, you're going to be required to have solar panels installed. So when the developer is building homes, they're going to be building them with solar panels on board. Now, one of the big topics being discussed at the state level is the electrification of existing properties. And basically what this is, and it's funny, electrification sounds... I feel like they need to give it a different name. But,
right. It sounds funny.
Yeah. But what they're talking about is taking existing properties that are already built, being occupied, and converting them into fully powered by electricity. I guess very much like retrofitting the building for earthquakes, right?
Right.
And going through that process. So what's your opinion on that? Because that's going to cost a lot of money, or does it really not cost that much money?
I mean, that's exactly the big hot topic on that is that it's going to cost a lot of money, and the question is always who's going to pay for it. I mean, it's not as though we don't have the technology or the ability to do these things, if not for the economics that get behind things and slow things down. So although it's a great idea and I'm all for it, I think we're going to see a lot of that of pushback, or just plain and simply, people not being able to afford it, especially with older homes. Because you got to remember, there's going to be some homes in the Bay Area that are like 1910 build, 1920 build, and many of those have been renovated already, but are still going to have a lot of the old equipment. On newer homes, it's a different story. It is going to increase the cost of newer homes because of all the new technology that goes into it. And I could only assume that as that technology becomes more proliferated, then the cost will eventually go down. And again, although this is a great topic, especially for the environment, it is still 2030, which is still relatively a long time away. Right? We're supposed to have flying cars by now, but that's not quite the case.
So 2030 is going to be the beginning start date for new developments going forward. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, what you were saying is, if you're trying to convert existing properties and put solar panels on them, there's still a lot of buildings, like you mentioned, that are really old that still have fuses.
Right, or knob and tube.
Yeah, and even if they're out of fuses, the actual current main panel may not be able to handle a lot of the load that's being able to get generated by the actual solar panels. And then you start to get into issues of, well, where's all this excess power going to go? If all of a sudden every property has solar panels, which I guess would be good, because all that can be funneled right back to a company like PG&E for them to then distribute out to other buildings.
Well, except for that right now PG&E is undergoing bankruptcy, and then PG&E actually is because I put solar on the building, I put solar on my home, and I think, although that was a great idea to send the energy back to PG&E and get reimbursed, PG&E is actually, I think, now fining certain people once they exceed a certain limit of.
They have a very weird formula or algorithm on how they calculate that. But one of the other options is to get a battery storage for your own place and store it there. I mean, I'm a fan of Tesla and their battery and their solar panel roof.
In fact, they're promoting that right now, where Tesla has a battery that would store excess energy so that you could begin to get off the grid between the solar or the energy that's generated from your solar panels on your roof to just powering your everyday regular electrical expenses, so to speak, or electrical power needs, but having a battery right on the house that saves up and creates a reservoir for electricity when the sun goes down or when there's clouds in the sky and you're not generating as much power from your solar panels or your wind as you might normally be.
And with the Tesla batteries, you can attach, I believe, up to 4. It's pretty impressive. And I love their roof, but the roof is like $80,000. You can get a new roof for like $30,000.
Right, exactly. So hopefully the prices of that will go down. It'll be an interesting stretch to get there.
Okay, so for our last segment, what we want to do is do an analysis on like an actual investment property. Again, just to remind everyone that if you have a property that you would like for us to analyze for you on the show, just email it to us, reach out to us, send us a comment, hit us up on the DM. Whatever way you want to reach out to us, give us the address to your building. We'll contact you. We will need some information, but then we will analyze the property on the show, and we can keep your info confidential. So what property are we going to analyze today, Brian?
Well, today we're going to analyze a 8-unit building. Again, this is greater than 5 units, so now we're going to be underwriting it or reviewing it from a commercial loan standpoint. And regardless of whether or not it's a 1 to 4 unit loan, like a house loan or a duplex loan or a commercial loan, whenever you're looking at any type of investment, it's important to kind of understand what denominators or what makes an investment a good investment, right? So, of course, whenever I break anything down, I like to look at it from a capitalization rate standpoint first. So here we have an 8-unit building in Vallejo. Now, the majority of the value add on this has kind of been taken away because I did a little bit of history on the property. It's a really gorgeous property, and you can tell from the pictures that it's renovated. In fact, when you go to the property, you'll notice it's been renovated.
And these are townhouse-style units, right?
They are townhouse-style units, yeah. In fact, what I always like to do is pull public records and get a little bit of a background as to what the owner owns or owes on the property. And so in this particular property, I noticed that the loan was about $1,375,000, and its original purchase price was $950,000. So for those of you wondering why that's important, it explains that this was a construction loan. The property was purchased by the current owner, renovated. They put roughly $350,000 into the property in renovations. And again, I've toured the property, and those renovations do show. So now they're asking or reselling the property. So it's kind of like one of those fix or flip projects except on apartment buildings. And they're asking a price of $1,995,000. Well, how do I know if that's a good investment or not? Right? So earlier I talked about cap rate. Cap rate is the return on your investment if you bought this building all cash. So in this case, $1,995,000. You took its actual rental income, which is $15,385 a month which annualizes to $184,620 a year.
Now, for those of you that are not super familiar with the Vallejo market, there are 2 bedrooms on the market right now, like 2-bedroom apartments going for about $1,800. Some apartments even get up to $2,000, $2,100, depending on very unique circumstances. We have a building we manage where these there are 2-bedroom apartment units with large balconies that oversee the water. They're pulling in about $2,250 right now, as far as 2 bedrooms in Vallejo. These are townhouse style units, completely different. Do they have garages also?
They have carports. And the rents on here are about $1,895 to $1,950 per month on the average. And all totaled up, it's about $15,385 a month. And there is a little bit of room on that to go up in rent. As Mark pointed out, there are some units in Vallejo renting for as much as $2,100, $2,250, right? Now, whenever you underwrite or evaluate a property as to a good investment or not, I always recommend you use the actual rents in your calculations. And then you also take into consideration different rent control laws in the area, whether or not you're restricted to the amount you can raise, while also looking at the overall market as to what you can realistically raise the rents to the next year and the year thereafter, because this will all go towards increasing the value of your property. Remember, income property is valued, meaning it goes up in its original price based upon the greater income that it might make in the future, as well as the current income it makes now. So that all said, when you take that $15,385, you annualize it to $184,000 a year, what you need to do next is take into consideration the expenses. You never use the 100% of the rents you're collecting. You always take a vacancy factor. So in this case, for underwriting purposes, we take 5% vacancy, so we only use 95% of that future income.
So, quick question, because I've had this question from several people, is why use only 5%? Would it be smarter to be more conservative at maybe 10% vacancy?
And that's a very good question. So it depends on the area or the MSA that you're in. Different parts of the country, you would use 10%. In the Bay Area, you always want to check with what a lender would use, because, and I've had this argument with different brokers. Some will argue that the vacancy in the Bay Area is only 2% or 3% in the area. And although that might be true, at the end of the day, unless you're going to buy the property all cash, or that you're going to rely on that being the consistent vacancy factor forever, then always defer to what the lender is using. So the Bay Area right now, lenders are using a 5% vacancy factor. And again, this is important when using 5 units or more versus a house. On a house, lenders will actually use 25% vacancy factor. Again, you got to take the difference between a single unit that's generating income. Whenever that one unit becomes vacant, you're 100% vacant. So when you take that 100% vacancy, the fact that it's vacant for a month because you're renovating it or turning it over when the tenant leaves, and you're marketing it, and then you're screening it for new tenant applicants, by the time you get it rented out, you're usually 2.5 months without rent. So with houses, you round that up to a 3-month of no rent on a 12-month period, and you get that 25% vacant, because you're only using 9 months of effective income and rent. Now on 5 units or more, or in this case 8 units or higher, then you just use that vacancy factor of whatever the prevailing market is bearing, be it 3, 5, or what the lender will give, right? So we're using 5% here because that's what the going vacancy rate is that lenders will use to determine how much loan this property can support. Again, the probability that that property becomes 100% vacant is pretty low. Same reason why banks will loan on construction that's 100% empty to start, since it hasn't been built yet, because they're banking on the fact that it will be. So once you've taken that vacancy factor and decreased the amount of rent that you are normally working with, you're going to take into consideration all the usual suspects of monthly expenses. Again, that's important because you're talking about things that are specific to the property. In this case, we're just talking about utilities of water, garbage, and electricity. Now, this might very much differ from other apartment buildings in the country, like say in the state of Maine or in New York, where you might have additional cost that are seasonal, like snow shoveling. Then you got to take into consideration the landscaping, because if the property, and you can see from the pictures that it is manicured, it doesn't have an elaborate landscaping job, but it's got some very low
it's very
water,
low maintenance.
low maintenance plants and a lot of mulch. So there's probably going to be mainly just groundskeeping, because people litter. So you have to take those landscaping costs. You always need to take a management fee. And again, I get this question all the time from owners, like, well, I don't need to take that because I'm going to manage it myself. Well, whether or not you're managing it yourself or you're having it professionally managed, you're going to be taking time away. And again, you're looking at this from the perspective of a bank who you're applying for a loan for. They're not going to manage it if they have to take it from you. So they always apply a management fee, in this case 5%. And then, repair reserves, because things break, and then a capital improvement reserve, which is different from a repair reserve. Banks will also require you to set aside money annually in savings for those big capital or big improvement costs, like a roof.
Now, one thing I do want to mention for capital expenses, I'm looking at photos of the building, and I see that there's 3 walkways from the parking spaces to the actual front door entrances. Why I'm pointing this out is that many people don't know that there's now a new law in California that kicks into effect January 1st of 2025, which requires mandatory inspections every 6 years of any walkways or balconies, patios, anything over 6 feet tall. These will qualify. So this is something
that's good to know.
This is something that you would have to then consider in besides just commercial lending underwriting, but when you're running your numbers in order to determine if this is a good deal, you're going to have to take into consideration that you're going to have to do actual damage on the actual inspection, because it's one of those I forget the actual term, but you have to damage the balcony in order to inspect it. It's kind of weird.
Oh,
but
they probably have to poke through the wood to make sure it's not dry rotted.
Correct. And you have to do 15% of it, 15%, and then you have to patch it up. So it will get costly, assuming there's no repairs. Even more costly if there are repairs.
And then now going down the list of additional expenses, a correct calculation for property taxes. I always encourage people to look up the ad valorem rate, and not just to rely on the rule of thumb of 1.25, because that number can swing wildly through the Bay Area from like 1.01 to 1.25 to 1.36.
On next week's episode, we should show people how to look that up.
Yeah, no, that would be a great idea. And then, of course, a proper insurance, annual insurance. So once you've taken away all those expenses, you're left over with the net operating income, which is the income that you have, but before you make a mortgage payment. Now, a lot of times I always tell people this: when you think of mortgage payment, you should not think of principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, or PITI, because when you underwrite buildings, you've already taken out the taxes, or the T, and the insurance, which would be the I, and you're just looking at mortgage payment strictly from the principal and interest standpoint, and that's what you're deducting from what's left over. But when you take your net operating income, which in this case would be $121,462 a year, and you apply that to the asking price of $1,995,000, I get a cap rate of 6.09, or a return of 6.09. And again, from investment standpoint, that's actually a pretty good start return when you're looking at real estate. And the reason you would conclude that would be is, well, if my money was sitting in the bank, what would it be earning? If it was sitting in a mutual fund, what would it be earning? And again, you're comparing it to other vehicles of investment and what kind of returns you would get on that. Aside from the fact that all other forms of investment are going to be openly taxable as either ordinary income or passive income, whereas real estate has a shelter against that income, in this case depreciation. But the bell is ringing.
Yeah, and one thing I want to point out before we finish up this show here is that the debt service coverage ratio on this property on the basic numbers is 1.42. This is very different from the last property we analyzed last week. So if you want to, go back to that episode, compare the two, and you can see how the numbers vary greatly. And then this property, according to what we estimate, has the potential in a few years to get up to an 8, almost 9% cap rate. So I think, in short answer, would this be a recommended buy?
Yes, I would highly recommend this. And you pointed out something there with the cap rate. I started with a start cap of 5.5, 5, or 6. And you always want to look at where you will be at in year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5 with normal, regular rental increases. And again, when I say regular increases, whatever that particular city will allow for. If it's rent control or not rent control, not what you think you can get, or if there's a huge discrepancy between what the market will currently bear and what you're currently getting. So it is a very good property, at least from the denominator of the cap rate standpoint. One of the other things that we'll touch on maybe on a later episode are, what does debt service coverage mean, right? Because that takes into consideration a lender just making the decision to loan $1,500,000 as debt on this property. How do they make that justification? Well, that's through the debt service coverage ratio that they use as a benchmark. And does this property equal or exceed or fall short of that requirement? In this particular case, just as a quick cheat sheet, it does exceed the requirement of what normal lenders will want to see as adequate debt service.
So with that said, the property is a recommended buy. Thank you for watching. Hopefully you liked the new format. I really enjoyed it. What about you, Brian?
No, I definitely enjoyed it too. This is how I normally talk, this kind of fast-paced level, so I don't have to slow myself down into a 1-hour episode.
Perfect. So watch next week's episode where we're going to get into a few more of these topics. And thank you for watching. Make sure to subscribe on Facebook, YouTube, and iTunes.
And please, tell us what you think. Ask us questions, and we'd like to hear from you. And stay tuned for the next episode.